so much. Thank you all so much for being here, and happy Disability Pride Month. For those of you who don't know, basically the ADA, when they signed in the protections for people with disabilities, that happened July 26th. And so that is why we have Disability Pride Month. So thank you so much for taking time out to be here today. And I'm so happy to be able to chat with y'all. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that you can all see my presentation. Okay. Hope it is all good. So balancing invisible disabilities safely with visible advocacy. Okay. So a little bit about me. My name is Sam. My pronouns are they and them. So I'm a supervisor for a suicide crisis line, and I have worked as a peer support specialist in Sacramento County. I'm a queer, non-binary, Hispanic individual who has a service dog. So I have a lot of different facets in my life. And I have a lot of lived experience in navigating both the workplace and social life with so many intersectional identities. After being diagnosed with a psychiatric disability, I took it upon myself to really dive deep into ADA laws and to understand what self-advocating for my rights would look like. After facing a lot of backlash, misunderstanding, and microaggressions, I am happy to be here to be able to share my lived experience and how self-advocacy has helped me. So before we get started in this topic, I wanted us to do some little grounding activity. So before we get started, let's do some belly breathing. So if you're able to, if you're in a safe place, place one hand on your upper chest and the other just below your rib cage. This will allow you to feel your diaphragm as you move, as you breathe. If you are also able to, you are open to, or you are more than welcome to close your eyes. So start breathing slowly through your nose so that your stomach moves out against your hand. The hand on your chest should remain as still as possible. Tighten your stomach muscles so that your stomach moves back in as you exhale through pursed lips. The hand on your upper chest must remain as still as possible. So let's go ahead and do that a few times. So I'm going to do it with y'all. Last breath in and out. Thank you guys so much for doing that practice with me. Feel free to return to this if you ever feel any overwhelmness from this presentation or need a moment for yourself. So I want to do a little reflection moment. So imagine for yourself and silently reflect. What is the visual that comes to your mind when you think of a disabled person? So what does that person look like? What is that person doing? What is that person using? And the context behind that. So I'm going to give you a few seconds to kind of just sit there and think about it. Now I want you to start to wonder, where does this perception come from? Is this from a movie that you've seen, a TV show, someone that you've interacted with, or maybe you don't know if you've ever interacted with a disabled person? Just kind of think on that for a little bit. Perfect. So to give you an understanding of what our presentation objectives are today is, at the end of this, I would love for y'all to be able to understand what being disabled means and the difference between visible and invisible disabilities. How to safely advocate for yourself and others for equitable spaces and to use inclusive language. To understand ADA laws in terms of disability rights. To understand navigating workplace accommodations and that process. To have an understanding of community resources to further practice self-autonomy, and to learn to practice self-care in this autonomization. So before we delve in, here are some common terms. So feel free to read them out. So we have ableism, ableist microaggressions, accessible, and ADA. So I will give you a few seconds. ADA is a really big one that's going to be coming up. So that is Americans with Disability Act, and that is a federal law that gave a lot of protection, or basically gave all the protections to people with disabilities, and was a huge step, which is why we're having Disability Pride Month again. Yeah. Okay. So what is considered a disability in the US? So according to the Americans with Disability Act, which is our federal law that we use as a guiding principle for understanding the protections that we are given, they define it as a person with a disability is someone who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, has a history or record of such impairment, such as cancer that is remission, or is perceived by others as having such an impairment, such as a person who has scars from a severe burn. And don't worry, we'll break this down even more. So now what does any of that mean? So in terms of disability protection under ADA law, it's very vague and it does not intend to offer a specific standard for the life limitations or the life impact that a disabled person has. So when it says the wording of substantially limit a major life activity, this can range from an internal process such as the psyche or to a physical limitation. So some examples provided by the ADA are actions like eating, sleeping, walking, movements, cognitive functions, tasks like working, reading, or operation of a bodily function like circulation, reproduction, and individual organs. So it has a wide range of applicable things that fall into this limitation of a major life activity. And still kind of confusing, I understand. So, and the other part of having a history of a record of an impairment is also protected under ADA. So this means that if you had cancer and you are in remission, you are still protected, even though you do not actively have that right now. If you also are perceived as a person who has a disability, that further clarifies that someone who may or may not have the impairment, but is subject to discrimination for others' beliefs that they do, is also protected under ADA. But the caveat here is that the ADA does not offer protection to impairments that are transitionary or minor, which means that it does not last this condition for greater than 6 months. Okay, so now we can talk about invisible versus visible disabilities. So invisible disabilities is a commonly coined term that used to describe disabilities that are not visible from the outside. So if we think back about our reflection from earlier at the beginning of this presentation, I can make an assumption here that a lot of people's perceptions of someone with a disability refers to someone using assistive equipment, such as a wheelchair, a walker, or a guide dog. However, in recent surveys, and this one was only in 1994, there have been more frequent ones, they found that only 26% of the 1 in 10 Americans that have a disability use assistive equipment such as wheelchairs, canes, crutches, or a walker. So that really narrows down the scope of how many people have visible equipment that can be seen in society to substantiate the claim of their disability. However, a lot of disabilities are not visible. So some examples can include debilitating pain, fatigue, dizziness, and these are some of the symptoms of having, an invisible disability that may not be visible to the naked eye, but are still impacting the major life actions of that person, such as those that qualify under the ADA law. So what is the impact of the visible versus invisible disabilities? So opening up the dialogue and increasing the understanding of the variability of disabilities helps destigmatize and relieves expectation for disabled people to have to take on the burden to continually educate people without disabilities. For myself, with a service dog, I appear very, I appear as if I do not have a disability. It is not visible, so I would often get a lot of questions as to why do you need a service dog? Or how did you lie so that I can also get a service dog? So there was that assumption that I was just skirting the system in order to just bring my dog with me everywhere. And having that expectation of me to have to educate this person as to, no, not all disabilities are visible, you know, or I actually don't owe you an explanation for my disability. Because a lot of people do. You're sharing a medical diagnosis, and not every stranger that you encounter necessarily needs to be privy to that information, nor is it the person who is disabled's responsibility to have to educate. So being a true ally takes the understanding of the impacts of living with a disability to include the intersectional understanding of those lived experiences as well. So while you may be disabled, you may also be a trans disabled individual, and how that plays an impact on how you are navigating the space. Or you may be a person of color, and how that further implicates the reactions and the reception you were receiving from the general community as well. So language is really important. So this is some language from a disability rights activist and disabled writer themselves, Emily. And I want to caveat this by saying that it is always best, if you are referring to a specific person, to ask them what terms are reflective of their lived experience and their identity. So this is not a catch-all list, and sometimes people may have preferences as to what they prefer. But in a general sense, I want us to understand that disability or disabled is not a bad word. It is not a bad thing. So languages that we can use are disability, disabled, versus differently abled or handy-capable. Person with disabilities, disabled person, yes, versus handicapped, special needs. Another version, has a disability, is disabled, versus afflicted by, suffers from, victim of, where it kind of takes away the power and autonomy this person has and puts them in a victim stance. Whereas a lot of people feel empowered. They feel that connection with their disability. It doesn't make them less than. And the same regards to terms like high functioning or low functioning, versus a person who is able to, a person who is unable to, a person with high support needs, as opposed to leveling and quantifying a person's functionality. So another process with living with a disability is navigating the workplace. And part of this is with requesting workplace accommodations. So a person with a disability is able to start what is called the informal interactive process with their employer to give you, to implement a change or adjustment at your work due to your medical condition. So this can be done verbally, but it is best to have a paper trail of requests and discussions in case there's ever a dispute about accommodations. In my experience, having very thorough documentations, emails, and receipts of conversations, next steps, and guidance has been really helpful in the accountability factor, because a lot of employers do not understand ADA laws, nor do they have an understanding of how to best support their disabled employees. And so some employers may have their own forms for you to fill out. And they may ask for you to provide additional documentation to see that your disability does meet the criteria for an ADA definition of disabled. So I understand that this can be a totally scary process. In today's capitalist society, it is hard to say, hey, I want to be able to do my job well, but I need the support, because we don't want to be seen as unable to do our job. We may not feel comfortable. We may fear job security, financial security if we do things like this. And so I want to talk about how to safely self-advocate for yourself. So not a lot of employers are familiar with the interactive accommodation process, and you may be initially just told no with no justification or reasoning. And it can feel daunting to share personal information at work, especially one that has a stigma of feeling like you're a burden, that you're asking for too much, when you're really just asking for support to get your needs met. So when starting the accommodation process, it's not entirely fair for the person with the disabled person to take on the emotional labor of that conversation. And I want to acknowledge that, but in order for a lot of employers to be receptive, it is best to keep the conversation positive and to emphasize the direct correlation of your accommodation and the positive impact it will have on your workplace performance. So you can highlight the prioritization of taking care of your health and doing your job well. These are not two mutually exclusive things. So, but this can take on a lot of emotional labor, pressure, and stress. So it is very important to practice self-care in order to autonomize. So understand that your employer's definition of disabilities, their microaggression and ableistic practices that prevent you from educating themselves on disabilities is not a reflection of you. You are allowed to take up space and to work in a space that best supports you and your health. And I want you to believe in yourself, believe that you are worthy of respect, and believe in your human rights. Do not settle for less. You are not entitled because you seek the same opportunities as people with disabilities. So I want to talk about building resiliency practices to cope. So here are some different means in which you can practice resiliency when you face these hardships, maybe when you face that pushback. And once again, it is not fair for the disabled person to have to take on this emotional labor. But in today's reality, I want to ensure that we are talking about ways for you to take care of yourself in this process. And the Health, Aging, and Physical Disabilities, our RTC, has a lot of great resources and additional steps as well. So it's just some key takeaways that I wanted to emphasize. So we talked about the definition of a disability and what the ADA defines for that. We talked about how not all disabilities are visible, how language matters and disability is not a bad word, how workplace accommodations are available, how individuals deserve the right to take care of their health and be able to continue with their employment if this feels right for them. People with disabilities deserve the same access and opportunities as those without, and practicing resiliency aims to prioritize your safety and well-being. So I wanted to provide some educational resources as well. We have some media, some books. I also wanted to provide some community resources. Disability Rights is a great resource that I've used myself for legal advice and questions. And there are also financial resources as well. Do we have any questions? See, okay. Will this presentation be available after? I have several coworkers that need accommodations that are being denied. I believe that they would benefit from this presentation. Thank you so much. I do believe that this presentation will be available afterwards, and the resources should be available as well.
Yes, we're going to post a copy of the presentation on the wellness website. And if you have responded, accepted, or tentatively accept, you'll be notified by email.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that.
So Sam, thank you so much for the the excellent presentation, and it really opened our eyes to what is possible and what we can do to communicate and relate to other people. So can you please repeat or reiterate, how do we know that this person needs to be addressed, you know, in this particular way, or that we have to do certain accommodations if we are on the other end?
As employers?
As employers or as coworkers, as colleagues?
Of course. So we want to be mindful that we don't want to take on, as maybe as non-disabled people, a savior complex to have to try and save another person. So we also want to practice self-autonomy and checking in with that person. Do you feel comfortable if I were to have a conversation? How can I best support you? Because those the needs of the individual change, and maybe not everyone would feel comfortable having additional pressure or additional support, so asking in and checking in, and even with the language, what makes them feel most comfortable is a great way of practicing respect when wanting to support individuals.
So if I am, let's say there's a person here who has visible disabilities, but they are not asking for any accommodation, what would be my next best question? Or do I just leave it alone?
Yeah, so this is a great question, because not a lot of people know that they have access to accommodations. They may not be aware. And so opening up a conversation and asking, you know, are there any tasks that you may feel like feel like would be beneficial with additional support? And if they say no, then that's it. Or if they say, yeah, actually, being at my desk for 5+ hours leaves me with chronic pain that's related to whatever's, you can also empower them and say, these are your rights to ask for accommodations to support you. So educating in that manner and being respectful of whatever the answer may be is a great way of offering that support. And also speaking up in workplace meetings. If you ever notice any microaggressions or anything that puts a disabled person at a negative point of view, speaking up and being a voice, because taking off that emotional labor is huge.
Thank you, Sam. That was very, very insightful in terms of what we need to do. And it's a challenge and a new experience for us, whether it's a visible or invisible disabilities, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we appreciate the resources that you have posted. And we will send them or post the presentation on the wellness website as soon as our website developer is able to do that. And we will send everyone a notification as well.
Perfect. That sounds amazing. I want to thank you all for showing up, opening up the dialogue, and for continuing to be a disability advocate. This is a great thing, and I want you to know that it's not a small feat. So I appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you. This wellness session is provided to you by the CCHS wellness team. So please contact cchwellness@cchealth.org if you have any questions. And also we would ask that you please click on the link that's been submitted into the chat and provide your survey feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you, Sam. We normally leave the window open for a bit because of the link of the survey link, and you will get a copy of the survey results as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, and if you can think of like what would be a good follow through afterwards, now that we know this and what's the next step, that would be great. So,
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. Renee, I think you have to repost the survey to the chat.
Okay,
You want me to
Yes.
post it or do you have it?
I think I can just copy it.
Yeah, I think so.
Maybe I can't. It takes me to the link.
Okay, let me post it.
Okay.
Sorry, everyone, we're having some
Technical
slowdowns here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I see it's in there, Arlene.
The link?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you added it. Yeah.
Yes.
And are we still recording?
Let me stop it. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Stop.